everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator, and I'm welcoming all of you tonight to this really important program. I'm so glad you could join us. It's probably a good thing we're on video and virtual tonight because we have a snowstorm raging outside. The perfect time to get a cup of coffee, a hot chocolate, and join us for some important, really important information for your family. If you are a first-time participant in the Glenbard Parent Series, my hope is that you will come back again and again, and please share the resource. GPS is free to everyone, anywhere, homeschool, parochial school, public school. Please join us if you are a social media person, like us on Facebook, and we welcome families of all ages because some of our programs target young families as well. So I hope you will come back. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make this possible, and special thanks to those who came tonight. We will be recording this. Thank you very much. If you go to the glenbardgps.org and you look at Ron's page, you'll be able to find the recording of this to share with a partner or to view again. Ron Lieber is the author of The Opposite of Spoiled, Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, and Smart About Money, which was an instant New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller when it was released in 2015. And we had the pleasure of hosting Ron for one of his first talks at the Glenbard Parent Series at that time. The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. Will you show that slide, Jerica? I want everybody to see this book, and I want everybody to know that this is a book that you'll need to pick up because the happy news is that this book debuted at #4 on the New York Times best-selling list. So if this is your introduction to GPS, you will read this book, please. And then, Jerica, can you show the slide of what's coming up? Because we've got some programs that are very, very much aligned with the programming tonight. If you've read the book by Tara Westover, Educated, a Memoir, this is a young lady who insisted on getting an education in spite of all the odds. She'll be here with us for our community read on Tuesday, February 23rd. In a few days, we'll be welcoming Sean Derrick, 5 Ways to Actively Engage with Young People. At the end of the month, Dr. Tyrone Howard will be with us for our Black History Month event, Uplifting the Whole Child to Combat Toxic Stressors and Cultivate Critical Wellness. Race and culture matter. All students must thrive. And then coming up in the next couple of weeks, we'll be hosting Julie Lycott-Hames. She has a new book coming out on adulting, and a program for the crowd here tonight. We'll be talking with Heather McGowan, the future of careers and education, most likely to succeed. So come on back on Thursday, March 9th. So we welcomed Ron with that book, The Opposite of Spoiled, and we're just delighted to welcome him back here tonight. He has been the Your Money columnist for the New York Times since 2008. Before coming to the Times, he wrote the Green Thumb personal finance column for the Wall Street Journal and was part of the startup team at the paper's personal journal section. His first book, Taking Time Off, Inspiring Stories of Students Who Enjoyed Successful Breaks from College and How You Can Plan Your Own, debuted in 1996. He will be speaking with us for a few minutes, and then Terry Savage, special thrill for me, will be also interviewing Ron. She'll be talking with him for about 35-40 minutes, and then we'll take questions in the Q&A. Terry Savage is a nationally recognized expert on personal finance, the economy, and the markets. She writes a weekly personal finance column syndicated in major newspapers by Tribune Content Agency. She is the author of 4 best-selling books on personal finance. A new edition of her best-selling book, The Savage Truth on Money, is now available on Amazon.com. The first edition was named one of the top 10 money books of the year by Amazon. Her other recent book is The Savage Number, How Much Money Do You Really Need to Retire? She's also the co-author of The New Love Deal. Terry appears frequently on national television and radio. We are thrilled that she is here tonight and thrilled that she can join us in conversation with Ron Lieber. Please take it away, Ron.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Gilda, and thanks to the team at the Glenbard Parent Series. I want to add a special note that it's just thrilling to be home to the extent that anyone is anywhere right now. I'm a Chicago boy by birth, and though I have been living in New York City for 25 years now, Chicago will always be home. And it is a special thrill to do this alongside of Terry Savage, who, as all of you know, is a legend, not just in Chicago, but beyond. It is an honor to have her, giving me the third degree tonight. So I wanted to start by taking a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about how and why this book came into existence. And it actually goes back to my Chicago days. I was a student at Francis W. Parker School in the city. I was there for 14 years. It's a private school, as many of you know. And what happened there and what happened as I was applying to college came as a result of the fact that my family fell on some difficult financial times, and we did not have enough money for me to attend the schools that I wanted to go to. At the time, there were not a lot of kids on financial aid at Francis Parker, and our college counselor wasn't really sure quite what to do with us. But he had the name of a guy, the guy you were supposed to see in the Chicagoland area if you needed money and help for college. And so he hands us this slip of paper with a 708 phone number on it. I think that area code still exists. We knew it to be a suburban area code. So we call it up, and this guy answers and he says, yeah. He says, come to this address, on Hinman in Evanston next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Come in through the side door and bring me $50 in cash, right? So this, seemed a little fishy, but we show up and it's the Northwestern University Financial Aid Office. And it turned out that this guy was the assistant director of financial aid at Northwestern. And he had this amazing side hustle going on where, every afternoon during the fall, after his colleagues had left for the night, he would, bring in these people through the side door of the building, and you'd go into his office and you'd give him the cash, and he'd explain to you all of the secrets of how the financial aid system worked. And this guy knew exactly what he was talking about. And he helped us with what was then the FAF form that became the FAFSA eventually. I applied early decision to Amherst College. I got in, I got a great financial aid package, managed to get out of there with $8,000 or $9,000 in student loan debt. And so in some ways, it's probably no surprise and no coincidence that I grew up to do what Terry Savage does for a living, that I found my way eventually in journalism to personal finance, where I consider my beat to be beating the system. So, flash forward a bunch of years, and I've landed at the Wall Street Journal. I'm a consumer affairs reporter. My first daughter's born, and I start to write aloud about how to save for college, right? Because this is something that I've suddenly become personally obsessed with. Within 5 years, we're in a major recession. A lot of people are washing out of school with a whole bunch of student loan debt. I start to write more about how to pay for college, or how not to pay for college, as the case may be, and how not to get into too much student loan debt. But as the years went by, and as I began to age into the cohort where some of my friends, both from the old country in Chicago and from New York City and in the newsroom at the New York Times, were starting to have their own kids, and readers were starting to seek me out on the topic, I began to get a different set of questions. And there were two things happening. First of all, people were showing up in my inbox and on my cell phone every March and April and May, and they could not believe what had happened since we all went to school, in the 80s and the 90s. They could not believe that the flagship state universities cost more than $100,000 for 4 years. They could not believe that the Northwesterns and the universities of Chicago had passed the $300,000 mark for 4 years without any discounts. And they had a question for me. They said, Ron, they said, your newspaper keeps, mouthing off about the fact that we all live in the era of big data. Well, when are you going to publish the big data set that explains to me why and how Northwestern is $200,000 better than Champaign-Urbana? And I didn't have a good answer for them. And then there was a different set of questions. These questions came from people who were otherwise smart, extremely sophisticated, often quite successful in their own right. But maybe they didn't earn so much money that they could just go around writing $75,000 checks, right? And so they were coming to me in March and April and May and saying, Ron, we had no idea that the financial aid system worked the way that it did. We assumed that we would get some help, and we did not. And we made all of these promises. to our child, and we're not sure if we can keep them now. And do you have some way, now that it's April 30th, for us to like get some more money? Right. So this was frustrating and sad. And I was sort of surprised to hear that, people didn't really understand this need-based financial aid system that had existed for so long. But there was more, because what's happened since I went to college in the late 80s and early 90s, as I think some of you know already, is that a whole separate form of financial aid and discounting has hived itself off. It's come to be known as merit aid. And sometimes it has a lot to do with your grades and your SAT scores and your leadership skills. And sometimes everybody's getting merit aid, and it just depends on how much you get and where you fall into the sort of the school's list. And people were up in my inbox saying, Ron, I don't even know what this merit aid is. I didn't apply for it. I don't know how to get more of it. My college counselor didn't say anything to me about it. And it became clear to me that they just had no idea how things work. The most basic of sort of principles and strategies around how the game had changed, nobody told them that part. And it wasn't clear to me why. And so what I realized was that I had been trying to answer the wrong questions in my column in the New York Times. I had missed it entirely. For all of the ink that I was spilling over how to save for college and how to pay for college, I missed the most important question of all, which was what to pay for college. People were asking value questions, and I had just missed it entirely until that point. And once I reframed the question for myself that way, I knew that I needed to write a book about it, that there was no way that I was going to be able to do in 10 or 20 or 30 newspaper columns what I would need to do to explain to people who pays what and why, how the system became so complicated, all of the emotional components that can lead us astray, when, if ever, it makes sense to spend $200,000 more than what our flagship state university costs, what all of the hacks and tricks and tips are that might save you money or might also cause huge problems for your teenager, and then all of the best distilled wisdom from my years of covering personal finance about how to plan, how to save, how to pay, how to borrow, and what to say to your kid about all of this. And so that is what the price you pay for college ended up turning into. So I just want to sort of set the table before I turn it over to Terry with a couple of like 25,000 foot questions that I always try to set friends up with who come to me when their kids are sophomores and juniors and know that I'm working on this project. And they want the sort of basics, or they want at least to be set up with kind of the right framing questions for themselves. And so I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, most people don't stop and take the time to actually define what college is, right? And this is not some, rhetorical exercise. I'm not pretending I'm a philosophy 101 professor. The basics just are this: like, if you're going to spend more than $300,000 potentially on a college education, you sort of need to know what it is that you think you're buying, because college is different things to different people and to different teenagers, and it should be, right? Because so much depends on what your family wants to get out of it, and what your teenager is interested in doing. So I started to ask this question of families: what is college anyway? And I heard all sorts of answers, but they really fell into three categories. So first of all, college is about the education. It's about getting your brain dissected and taken apart into its component parts and reassembled by an expert practitioner into a bigger and better version of what came before it, class by class, year by year. It's about having your mind grown and your mind blown. So that's number one. College is about the education. Number two, college is about kinship. It is about the friends that you make along the way, the peers who will lift you up and carry you through life at your wedding, at your funeral, everywhere in between, when you are laid off, when you're starting a company, whether it's personal or professional. You're trying to, establish that group, to find your people. And it's not just about peers, it's also about the grownups you meet along the way. Mentorship turns out to be a very important component of customer satisfaction, for lack of a better term. When people get out of college, they have gotten more out of it if they have found a mentor. So that's number two, finding your people, kinship. And number three, college is about the credential. and whatever it is that you're going to do with it. And you can sort of think about this in two ways. Maybe yours is a family where the parents didn't even go to college, and the kid who goes is going to be going for the first time. And that kid in your family is trying to jump a few rungs up on the social class ladder and grab onto the middle class or upper middle class and kind of hang on for dear life. And so maybe for you, it's about qualifying for medical school or becoming a nurse or becoming a teacher or an accountant. It's about getting that credential that will get you into a line of work that is both fulfilling and has a less than average chance of being exposed to a recession, right? You're looking for the stable gig and the more stable life. And then for other people, college is about taking a leap, right? It's about grasping for a set of circumstances, an institution that can open doors to you that your family might not otherwise be able to open to you because of its connections, because of its social class, because of its privilege or lack thereof. My family didn't really know a lot of people who worked in the Time Life building in New York City in the 90s. But I managed to get there within a year of graduation, in no small part because I went to Amherst College, right? So this is something that people do. They go to college for the credential. So education, kinship, credential. I want you to be thinking about those things for yourself and for your family. So that's the setup. Now, what can lead you astray before you even start shopping? I want everybody that I come into contact with, every reader, every person who's listening to this, I want people to be more emotionally honest with themselves about the kinds of feelings that can lead us astray during this process. And there are three major ones that I've identified. First, fear. Fear of falling down the social class ladder. Fear that if you make the wrong choice, you will somehow sentence your child to a life that is somehow less fulfilling or has a lower trajectory or leads to less satisfaction than the other choice would have led you to. Fear that if you make the less expensive choice, even if you're able to make the more expensive one, that you will have been doing it wrong and there will be no way to do it over again. So that's fear. That's number one, fear. Number two, guilt. Guilt that you do not earn enough, guilt that you do not save enough, guilt that you are unwilling to spend $300,000, even though 92% of you thinks that it would be crazy to do so. The guilt that your kid may heap upon you because he or she does not understand why you can't or won't do the same thing that the family next door or down the street is doing. Guilt that your parents were able to do it for you without thinking hard about it, and that you will not be able to do the same thing for your kid. There are so many different ways we can send ourselves on guilt trips over this, and I'm trying to get people back off that guilt airplane. So guilt is number two. Number three, snobbery and elitism. This can be as base and basic as wanting to impress your friends and get a gold star when it's time for the Instagram sweatshirt reveal. It can be it can be more expansive than that. It can be your concern that if you don't spend more, if you don't borrow more, if your kid doesn't go to the more recognizable institution with the more recognizable name, that some snob or elitist down the road will hold it against them, right? And this can actually be useful and true. If you've got a budding investment banker on your hands who wants nothing more than to work on Wall Street, the most gold-plated job that he or she can get is to go join one of the analyst programs at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. And the people who work there and hire there are a bunch of snobs and elitists, and they generally only hire, or they hire most of their classes from a very small handful of elite and super selective institutions. So sometimes it can make at least some sense to pay attention to other people's snobbery and elitism, but a lot of the times it comes from inside of us and it can lead us astray. So those are the three feelings that can lead to problematic decision making. And so more than anything, I want people to be making emotionally intelligent decisions and shopping for college, starting the process, not just finishing, but starting in a way that is emotionally honest. So that's the basic framing. So I know that Terry has a bunch of questions, and I cannot wait to hear what she asks of me. And we also want to leave time for you as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry here, and off we go.
Oh, Ron, that was a great intro. That really was.
Thank you.
First of all, let me tell everybody, I've been writing about this stuff for a long, long time. Ron and I share the same path, but I have never, ever seen anything as magnificently done as this book. This just changes the whole discussion. And I applaud you and congratulate you on what you've done. Let me say a few words about where I come from, so it was interesting to hear where you came from. I went to New Trier, and I wanted to go to Radcliffe more than anything in the world. Harvard wasn't open to women. I mean, I just had it in my mind I was going to Radcliffe. And my parents said to me one day, we can't afford to send you to Radcliffe. And I said, I'll get a scholarship, way back then. No, that won't be enough. You don't understand. You have to fly on a plane, and then you'd have to come home. And we just can't afford that. But one beautiful October day, they drove me to Ann Arbor. I walked across the Diag at the University of Michigan, and I went, oh my gosh, this is college. And I applied, early decision, and that was it. Fast forward a bunch of years, I took my son went to Latin, so I took my son to the airport to go to college. He had actually spent a couple of years at Choate in the East, and he wanted to go west. And so he applied to UCLA. And as I drove him to the airport, with my mother in the car at the time, I said, I just want you to know one thing. I've saved enough for 4 years of college. Not 4 years, but I changed my major, so I have to go to summer school. Not 4 years, but I didn't know that that was required to graduate, so I have to stay for a 5th year. I mean, that was the speech I gave, and I'm very proud that he did graduate in 4 years. I wanted to go on to graduate school. And I remember saying to my father, I want to go to graduate school. And he said, but you have 2 younger brothers. I can't afford that. And I said, well, this time I will get a scholarship. And I actually got a Woodrow Wilson fellowship, which kind of went by the wayside when I found the stock market, but that's another story. So a lot of what you said rang so true. Here's what I'd like to do in this next little bit. I want to ask you one more big picture question. And then for all of you, because you are presumably parents or relatives of high schoolers, Ron's book is not only about these big, profound thoughts, but it's about the practical things you need to know. And I want to lead you through that and let you talk about as a parent of a high schooler. And I hope we have some freshmen and sophomore parents here, because this is not something you do in January or February of senior year. But let me set up something which I have thought for a while, and you're the person to validate it. Most things we buy, we know what we're paying for. Maybe healthcare is an exception because insurance covers it. But nobody pays sticker price on a car, right? We know better than just walk in and say, oh, it costs $29,812. You're going to negotiate or something. Most of us know that if you're on a plane, remember the days when we were on planes, that not everybody paid the same fare. And it's not just the people up front paid more. I mean, you could buy 2 weeks ahead, or you could get a Southwest sale or whatever it is. And you're just sitting in that plane, a lot of different prices. But everybody who goes to college does not pay the price that's the list price. And I want you all to understand how to deal with that issue. But always before, you couldn't find out because the college said, because this is a price and we'll give you some aid and you can do a work study program and you can be, serve lunch in the residence hall, something like that. Am I guessing correctly that because of the pandemic, Ron, that balance of power has changed? And that colleges, first of all, parents are thinking, why would I pay all that money because it's virtual and she's going to sit in a dorm or maybe be at home? I mean, is the credential worth it? And the colleges are saying, oh my gosh, these kids' parents are thinking it's not worthwhile. We better do something to get them to stick with us. Is the power balance changed?
Yes, the power balance has changed, but we should also note that it has changed some because of the pandemic, but the power balance had changed a lot before the pandemic. And this is what the parents who were all up in my inbox each spring had missed, right? There's a sort of an overarching way to think about this and anchor it in your own head and the way that you think about value. And then there's a way to be sort of practical to describe it using institutions in the Chicagoland area that most people here will be familiar with. So the basic problem in the market that pre-exists the pandemic, but the pandemic has exacerbated it, is that there are all sorts of people in America still who have the ability to pay, or certainly the ability to borrow, up to $75,000 or $80,000 to send their kid to a private institution at the full price. And there are many more who have the ability to send their kid to a four-year institution at the flagship state university for what may now be more than $30,000 a year in certain states that are fiscal basket cases that shall remain nameless. But increasingly, as the list prices go up, quietly, without anybody ever talking about it in a direct way, the ability to pay is clashing with the willingness at these ever higher prices. And so if you think about how it works in the kind of firmament of the Chicagoland area and the higher education institutions there, Northwestern, University of Chicago, they still have a fair bit of pricing power. They are either all or just about all, sort of mostly giving away their discounts only to people who have demonstrated financial need. So that's the code for the old-fashioned financial aid system, like the one that I went through back in 1989. Northwestern and U of C have pricing power, and 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% of the students there are ready, willing, and able to write $75,000 or $80,000 checks each year, and they do. So, but if you go a step down in the market to institutions like Loyola or DePaul, there are large handfuls of people there who pay full price, but it's probably a single-digit percentage at the institution, because those institutions realize that while it's advantageous to them to keep their list prices high, so people think that there's a lot of value there, and so that international students or wealthy parents who are just desperate to get their troubled kid in somewhere, right? It's advantageous to keep those list prices high for the handfuls of people who pay them each year. But most people, even those with the ability to pay $60,000, $65,000, $70,000 for those schools, they lack the willingness. And so this whole separate system of financial aid that's come to be known as merit aid has kind of hived itself off. And Loyola and DePaul play hard in the merit aid system. But it isn't always predictable when you apply what it is that you might be eligible for. So it is a lot like the airlines, and it is a lot like the car dealership, except you don't get to say ahead of time what you're going to pay, and you don't get to find out about it quite often until after you've applied and gotten in, which is really messed up, right? I spend hundreds of pages dissecting this for people without ever coming right out and saying, this is a completely screwed up way of doing things, right? So let me just say that right now. This is a completely screwed up way of doing things. And then maybe one step further down the food chain, there are schools that are, desperate enough to get people in the door that they actually have to be transparent. So, Lake Forest College, right, is just front and center and ready with a very simple grid that tells you, SAT score here and GPA here. And wherever your numbers meet, that's the discount that they're going to give you off the list price. And if your numbers are lower than that, maybe they'll take you in and let you pay the list price, but maybe not. And so those are all the different ways that the game is played. So that was happening before the pandemic. What the pandemic has changed is that the other thing that basically no parents realize is that a lot of these discounts, a lot of these merit aid offers, they're being generated by software. There are algorithms running in the background that take a bunch of student information and maps it against demographics and your zip code. They take into account how often your kids are visiting schools' websites. All sorts of stuff's being tracked, and then the software suggests a discount. And what has happened in the last year or two is that the software doesn't know what to do, right? The software wasn't programmed to understand a pandemic, and everything is unpredictable. And so we're seeing strange things like Duke and UCLA getting outrageously high numbers of applications, and they can basically do whatever they want. And then other schools where, beds are going empty, or they just don't have the ability to predict what's going to happen in the spring. And so at those places, when those places are surprised by how few people want to send a deposit in by April 20th, you can bet that the offers are going to be flying on not just April 25th, but May 25th and June 17th. Your kids may get text messages with tens of thousands of dollars inside. Literally, I've seen this happen with desperate schools trying to fill their beds by throwing money around. So, that is that's kind of how things look right now. So,
Now,
yeah.
This is all aside from financial aid. We're going to come back to that. We are talking about what the price should be. And I want to go back to the word you used, because many parents, maybe some are my generation, but when you say merit, we think of merit scholarships. But when in the book, which was really smacked me like this, merit is not so much to do with you got straight A's or you were the editor of the school paper. Talk to me again. We'll come back to financial aid and debt and borrowing in a minute. This is just what the cost might be, so you can make some decisions based on what aid you get. But the merit discount is just really how badly we want your kid discount, right? That nobody knows quite.
Yeah, it's pretty confusing, right? This second system of financial aid has come to be known as merit aid, and it's a catch-all term that isn't really accurate in some instances. So again, think about the marketplace of institutions. The way merit aid first came into existence, it really did meet the definition of the term, and it took hold with a fair amount of vigor in the state of Ohio in the 1990s. Ohio has a thriving flagship state university, one of the biggest in the country, in Ohio State, and a whole bunch of really good small liberal arts colleges, and they were hurting. And one of the weakest among them decided to start throwing money around. They figured they could buy prestige by throwing $5,000 and $10,000 coupons at smart children to get them to come and kind of boost the profile of their institution. And it worked so well that there had to be a competitive response by the kind of next people a half step up the food chain. And so pretty soon, within 5 or 7 years, everybody from Oberlin and Kenyon and Case Western on down needed to throw money around to try and get students to come. And again, this did not have anything to do with financial need. There were all sorts of super rich kids getting $10,000 and $20,000 discounts. And pretty soon this sort of spread like wildfire. And a couple of institutions saw this and decided to just go whole hog. So the University of Southern California, right? Back in the day, this was the University of Second Choice. It was the University of Spoiled Children, but they had a big endowment and they decided to buy prestige using merit aid. Tulane University, especially coming out of Katrina, but even before, Tulane did not want to be, the safety school, party school anymore. And they used their endowment and they used merit aid to buy themselves prestige. Northeastern University, same way. Commuter school a generation ago. Now there's all these gleaming condo towers, filled with undergraduates who are paying full price increasingly because they use so much merit aid there to buy their way into prestige. All of these schools, as many of the people in the audience know, only accept 14, 16, 18% of their students right now. It's incredible what's happened at those three institutions. So many people have used merit aid strategically, but if you are farther down the food chain, right, and merit aid is being done to you, eventually things get so messed up that you have to start offering discounts to everybody. But you still refer to it as merit aid, even though it may not have much to do with merit. Why? Because merit aid at that point becomes a sort of psychological head trip. It is a way to market to families, to make the parents feel good about themselves because they've raised meritorious children deserving of academic scholarships, right? And it's the way to make the kids feel good, because all of a sudden they take the PSAT, and within 6 months, 16-year-olds are getting emails with the subject line, "Show me the money," where, literally tens of thousands of dollars are being thrown at these kids and their parents don't even know, right? So that's kind of how it works now. That's
Okay.
the system that we've created.
All right, now that's important because most parents don't know that. They think the price of XYZ college is $33,000 a year, but I really want to go to Princeton, but it's 67, maybe it's $80,000, whatever it is. They think that's a price. So this was an important thing to get out of the way first. Now let's go back. Let's go back and talk to the parents. I know you have wonderful guidance counselors in this audience, but let's go back and talk to you about how you start the process. And we don't have to go into the details of FAFSA. You could go read my book and tell, but let's talk about this whole concept of, before you even know what school you want to go to, there is something about needs-based financial aid. That's federal financial aid. Start right there. And then what your family's expected to contribute, and then how you fill the gap. And all the while, you don't even know what the price is going to be of whatever it is anyway. Okay.
Right. So I'm glad you brought up the guidance counselors, because I really feel for them in this process. There are many that are as confused as parents are about how this all works. And if you've got 200 kids that you're responsible for in the school, it feels unfair to expect the counselors to become an expert on these systems, given how complex they are. But for the many college guidance counselors in high school who actually do know how this stuff works, they're in a real pickle, because in order to advise families and do it right, you've got to ask them super personal questions about their finances. You've got to get them to get real emotionally with themselves and with you about what they're able and willing to do. And that's too much to ask of guidance counselors. And so, the ones that I speak to professionally and spoke to for the book, they're just really not sure what to do or how to start these conversations. And I have great sympathy for them. So if you're a parent, you should not, I don't think it's reasonable to expect a guidance counselor to lead you by the hand financially and walk you through your own personal affairs to sort things out for themselves. So you need to get real with yourself, your spouse if you have one, your ex definitely if you've got one of those, if it's possible to get on the same page, and then also have a conversation with your children about what you think you'll be able to pay, what you think you'll be willing to pay, and what the difference might be between those two things, right? So you get straight with yourselves, and then you've got to start the process. And so on the need-based side, one of the first things you should do is go and fill out the net price calculator at any given institution. And that helps you sort out whether you might be eligible for need-based aid. And there's a lot of people who don't understand. And I wrote a column 6 months ago for them. You can go Google it. The headline was something like, what a $200,000 family might pay at a $300,000 school. And it turns out that if you earn $200,000 a year, which seems like a lot and is a lot, you're eligible for $10, $15, $20, $25,000 of need-based financial aid at the Northwesterns and the Vanderbilts of the world. But you can't figure that out without filling out the net price calculator. So that's where you start.
Wait, where do you find each school? Wait, there is no one net price calculator.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
So talk about that.
Right. So every school is required by law to maintain a net price calculator where you can input your financial data and they will give you an estimate of your need-based aid. Sometimes it will help with merit aid too, but we can get to that in a minute. If you think you might be eligible for need-based aid, depending on your income and your assets, every school maintains one of these things. It's not always easy to find. It may not be front and center on the financial aid website. So the easiest thing to do is just Google, Loyola University of Chicago. Don't end up at Loyola University of New Orleans or Loyola Marymount in California, right? Loyola University of Chicago net price calculator, and it'll just pop right up.
Now, does that need-based aid include what you might get in federal financial aid?
It does. So it's inputting everything. It's running the federal formulas, and it's basically spitting back an estimate at you that'll say, this is what we think your bottom line price would be at this school. And that's after whatever federal aid that you might qualify for. So that could be a Pell Grant if you were lower income, and it will almost certainly include federal student loans at most institutions. And then, it might include some parent loans, depending on what sort of institutional aid, what sort of money the college has at hand that it might be willing to make available.
So that's how you know. My kid wants to go to Harvard. My kid might go to University of Illinois. You do the net price calculator, but the amount of financial aid for which you qualify probably is the same on each one, right? Or not?
Well, no, because different institutions use different formulas. And so one of the biggest variables has to do with home equity. So if you own your home and you've got a fair amount of money in it, or the value has risen, fairly quickly, different schools will ask for different amounts of your home equity. We'll consider the asset in different ways and in effect tax it at different rates. And this is really not evident. Basically no school puts this front and center on their financial aid website. And often the net price calculator, it doesn't come with a why. It doesn't come with an explainer. But if and when you get to March and April and you're lucky enough to have a bunch of offers from a bunch of private institutions in particular, and the bottom line prices are all over the map, it may have something to do with the fact that the schools treat home equity differently, and often differently to the point where it can make like a 5-figure difference.
Okay. Now, let's start. We've got a family out there. The kid's a sophomore. I'm going to have you go through some of these basics quickly. The first step is FAFSA, but you don't do that until it gets done October 1st of your senior year, but you need to know all about it. I don't want you to spend a lot of time describing, but that's a free application for federal student aid. Any key point you want to make about that? Because I want to move on to this big thing called EFC.
Yeah, so the FAFSA spits out the expected family contribution, which is the federal number that is a way to distribute and ration federal financial aid. Now, some public institutions just use that and run with it, and they distribute whatever aid they have available to them using that number. But there's 200, 300, 400 private universities that ask you to fill out a whole different form known as the CSS profile, which many people may be familiar with. And those colleges use that data, including the information about home equity that you provide there, to distribute whatever funds and discounts they have available that has nothing to do with the federal government. And so then you are done with need-based aid, but you haven't even started with merit aid yet.
Okay, right now, given the limits on federal financial aid, some is subsidized, which means they don't charge you interest while you're in school, but that's not the key ingredient. But it's like $27,000 for your 4 years that you can get for undergraduate. So if you're going to a school that's $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and your parents haven't saved a lot in 529, there is a humongous gap. I want to skip over only a little bit the idea that no, I don't want to skip over this because that's what we have a crisis today. We've got Congress saying, let's forgive past student loan debt. Let's not go there. But there's a giant gap for many kids between what they think that college is going to cost, although they might get this merit aid, and we'll talk about negotiating it. But the federal financial aid, a work study program that a school might give, that's not very much. That could be like $30,000 a year gap between what you've got saved, what the government will give you, and what you've got to pay. And then you're into debt. I want to say a few words about that because otherwise we wouldn't have $1.7 trillion of student loan debt out there.
Yes. So this gap exists, and all of the formulas, both the federal one and the CSS profile formula that the private institutions use, they assume that you are going to be able to pay a significant amount of after-tax money from your current income towards college. And most everyone you talk to essentially admits very quickly that the assumptions are unreasonable. And what these formulas are really built on is this notion that everybody has been on some kind of like linear trajectory or path, which, my family was very much not on. So there's all of these presumptions baked in, and yours might be like this too, right? There are all these assumptions baked in that, if your family has $200,000 in household income now, that you've been saving all along, when in fact, what you've really been doing is paying a whole lot of money and a whole lot of property taxes to get yourself into the Glenburg school district, right? So that your kids will be well educated enough to even have a shot at these schools, right? So you're nurturing them all along, with the money that you're spending, and you probably don't have $150,000 saved per kid, and now all of a sudden you're in a pickle, and the formulas are they're just not built to be incredibly generous to upper middle class families, and in all sorts of instances, they're not built to be generous to lower income families either, right? There is just this great expectation that we all will figure it out, and a lot of the discounting that goes on the merit aid side is in some ways, I mean, look, somebody at St. Olaf College, the head of financial aid and enrollment there, said to me, all this discounting that we do is a way to implicitly apologize for the fact that it never should have gotten this expensive in the first place, and we can't fix it. And so we're going to, have these sort of phony discounts over here on the side that will at least bring it into range where it will not crush you financially. It will only hurt you.
All right, now you've brought us to where every parent now is sitting on the chair. I want to say two things. Don't take out a Parent Plus loan. It's the worst, most expensive loan you could take out. You can mortgage your house, the interest isn't deductible, but that's not the right answer. Let's just say we have all these families now in the same spot. The gap is larger or smaller for them. They figure out how to get as much financial aid. They have no idea how to get this merit aid. How do you not only talk to your child, but how do you decide in the spring of junior year or early fall of senior year or over the summer, what schools should be on your list when you know that there's only so much financial aid you can get and everything's going to be expensive? What's the art of that? Choosing the schools to apply to. That's where the book is.
Sure. So I think there's an art to the conversation that you have with your kid, but there's an actual science to figuring out how to expand the list of possibilities. And, as much as the college counselors may find this irritating, I actually think it has to start way, way earlier, because you need some time to think through and investigate, where are the pockets of value here? Right? I mean, maybe the University of Illinois, maybe UIC is exactly what you want. Maybe your kid gets into the honors program there. Maybe you have a budding engineer on your hands, and you know that the comp sci department at Champaign-Urbana is, one of the best in the world and produces the likes of Mark Andreessen. Maybe your kid wants to nothing more than to be in a fraternity or sorority, and they're going to school for the kinship and the kinship only, and then they're going to come back and work in the family business, and that's fine with you, right? And that's fine with me too. I'm not here to cast judgments or aspersions. But if you are looking for something else, something that has a much higher list price, you need to start to figure out earlier than senior year, and I would argue earlier than junior year, so you can go visit these schools. Where are the institutions, the private ones or the public ones out of state, that are doing a lot of discounting for above average students, if that's the kind of student that you have on your hand? And if you have an average student on your hand, where are the schools, one or two or three tiers down in selectivity from the Northwesterns of the world, that also need to discount a lot because the ability to pay does not match the ability to pay, the willingness to pay for those institutions? And that just takes some legwork. It takes some research, it takes some skills, and it takes all of the privilege, right? That you need to have the time to do the research, which is unfortunate that that's how this has turned into. But, the bottom line is that there are all sorts of amazing, deeply undervalued small liberal arts colleges in the Midwest that would love to have your kid for $5,000 or $10,000 a year more than it would cost to send them downstate. These places are out there, and there are out-of-state public institutions like the University of Alabama that are just absolutely throwing money at smart kids from out of state. Some of you may be familiar with what happened in Illinois a couple of years ago. There were so many dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of amazing teenagers who were going to the University of Alabama that the state legislature, even amid all of the mess that they have created for all of you and for themselves, coughed up a $25 million scholarship fund because they were so embarrassed by how many great students were going down to the University of Alabama and paying less than they would have in Carbondale or Champaign or Urbana. And so, this is a thing, right? People are out there buying good students with discounts, and you should go out and find them.
Okay, that's the critical point. And first of all, that's why you read the book. Number one, seriously, because you have to understand that process of finding those, we all go to Marshall's. Come on, we know how to find a bargain now. We don't know how to do it in education, and that's part of it. One quick topic, college counselors. When I've been writing a bunch of my columns over the years, I've used like the college-wise network of really, they're all former admissions officers at big schools and stuff, and they know this stuff. There are people you can hire. Is that worth it?
I'm a big believer in paying for expert advice. I do it myself, in more than one avenue of life where you might not expect. My wife and I have a certified financial planner, a fee-only financial planner that we work with, even though I know a lot about this stuff. So I'm a believer in this, and I'm a believer in doing it for college as well. But here is what really upsets me about the various associations of college counselors that exist in the world. They do not make it easy to find the specialists who know more than 99% of their peers about merit aid and the merit aid discounting system. There is no way to go to, and there's like 4 different, at least, national associations of independent college counselors, right? It's hard enough that you need to shop 4 associations. It's sort of bonkers, right? But let's say you find your way to all 4 of their websites. You can't just go to a drop-down search menu and pick out the entry that says, merit aid, certified merit aid specialist, right? It's hard to even be sure which ones know a lot about financial aid generally. So these people are out there, but they're actually hard to find. And the old saw that people in your and my trade, Terry, often throw out at these points is like, well, ask a trusted friend. But the problem is this system. Yeah, this system is so complicated that you can't trust that your friend knew what they were doing or that their counselor knew what they were doing.
Oh, talk about Facebook. Please talk about the Facebook site.
Right. Yes. Okay. So it turns out that a lot of what's going on here behind the scenes is a form of self-education and community education. So the most valuable resource I found during my reporting was a closed Facebook group, but it's open to anybody who is willing to abide by the terms and conditions, called the Paying for College 101. It's run by a woman named Debbie Schwartz out of Pennsylvania, and it's somewhat sprawling, right? But if you show up there when your kid is a sophomore or even a junior or even a senior, even if you already made a bunch of choices, but want help in figuring things out on the back end if it comes time to negotiate, the people there are so experienced and so smart. And you can find gold in those threads. The other thing that's happened is, because this is such a mess, a whole bunch of for-profit startups have shown up to try and help people sort through it. So there's one called Edmit, EDMIT. There's one called Tuition Fit out of the Quad Cities. There's another one out of New York City called Merit More. And they are trying to kind of round up all of the data. Oh, and Debbie at Paying for College 101 has a service too. So it's worth checking these out if you want to short circuit some of the research, and you can use them to basically get a sense of, what are the peer institutions of the ones that I might be considering? Where are the ones where, my kid with a 1350 SAT and an A- average might get an outsized, discount, especially schools that I've never heard of, or maybe ones that are, not within 300 miles drive. So, there's a way to do this. I wish it was more efficient. If it was more efficient,
That's what we would
um,
do.
and if it was easier to explain, right? You and I wouldn't have jobs anymore, Terry, right? I mean, just all across personal finance. And I would not have had to write this book. The only reason I didn't want to do this, right? I did it because I felt like I had to, and because there were just way too many people who were confused, who deserved a better and more thorough experience that would lead to hope and not sadness and frustration.
Right, I'm watching the clock, but I want you to talk about one more thing because I read the book. I don't always read all the books that I interview people and write columns. So yours getting a column as soon as I can put this all together. But I read the book. I love what you have to say about the discussion, and this is something that I want you to just talk about for a minute. Yes, I know we're going to get Gilda. We're going to get some questions in, but so please stick with us. But talk to me about that discussion. I remember my parents saying we can't afford it, but I didn't know. I had no idea. And most people don't want their kids to know how much they make or whatever. How do you have that discussion? When does that start, by the way?
Sure. Well, I mean, to me, if for those of you who were around 6 years ago, when I spoke last time, when we were actually all in person in the auditorium, that I think the conversation should start when kids are 4, right? You start with allowance and 3 jars, and you begin introducing them over time to ever larger concepts and bigger piles of money, so that they have some context by the time they get to high school for discussing what is likely to be a 6-figure number when it comes to college. So hopefully you've started super early, but if you haven't, that's fine too. Your kids are mathable enough at this point that they can kind of get it. But my feeling is that you really do want to start having the conversation with your kid, ideally before high school starts, right? Now, many of you may not be in that spot at this point, but if you've got younger ones coming up in the pike, I encourage you to do it, because I feel like they deserve to know what you're able to pay and what you're willing to pay before they start down the road in high school. Because if they are going to have to earn their way to a more affordable degree, then that's something they ought to know, right? So let's say you've got a lights out middle school student and they're super academically inclined, and they want to go to the most selective institution possible, and they want a smaller, more intimate experience than they could get in Champaign or at UIC. You may want to say to them early on, look, we're not going to be able to spend $300,000 to, send you to the Ivy League or Caltech or MIT, and we're just not going to be willing to borrow to do that. But you have the ability, through your own effort and initiative, to keep getting these amazing grades. And really great schools like USC, like Tulane, like Kenyon College in Ohio, like McAllister in St. Paul, Minnesota, like Grinnell in Iowa, which has one of the biggest endowments per undergraduates in the entire United States. They will throw a whole bunch of money at really good students, and you can get an education of incredible value that will save us, right, $100,000, and will allow us to pay the $200,000 that we might be able or willing to pay, but not the $300,000 that's just going to be out of reach, right? And so I see no reason not to tell kids the truth about how things work, because they're going to figure it out on their own eventually, or the schools will start filling their inbox with all sorts of crazy numbers, and eventually you're going to have to explain it to them. And if you don't tell them about it until junior year, at that point, they may be like, well, moms, dads, why didn't you trust me with this information earlier? Did you really think that I couldn't handle it? Because now, maybe they've constrained their choices, through choices they've made to work hard or not earlier in high school. And then like the vicious math of GPA just doesn't allow them to catch up. And so I feel like that's a conversation we ought to have with our kids, and that they deserve to have with us, maybe even before high school starts.
Yeah, I know I did that with my son all the way through. Do you know what but what I used to say to my son is, well, I'm in the 50% tax bracket, so I have to earn $100 just to get that $50, because I have to pay $50 in taxes. We are coming to the end of our time. Gilda, can I do one lightning round, which I think will cover most of the questions people have and that you've
All
covered?
right. I have a couple of my lightning round too. So
Yeah, and I'm happy to stay on. So
All right,
we can go. Yeah, we can go ahead. Let's do it.
great.
Gilda,
Then
let me run down. Let me run down. Just give me run instead of the discourse we've had, but because they're covered in the book, give me one or two sentences on each of these. Okay,
Yep.
I've always said community colleges. Oh, that makes sense. Live at home for the first 2 years, and you'll pay for a lot less, and then transfer because nobody knows that you didn't go to Northwestern for 4 years or Michigan or Duke or whatever it is. Community colleges, Ron.
Great idea, can work really well. Only a tiny percentage of people who start at community college actually end up finishing within even 6 years. And so you need to be acutely aware of what classes you need at the community college and how they will transfer via the so-called articulation agreements to whatever your intended destination is. You need to have a counselor where you start, a counselor where you intend to go. You need to be sleeping at the foot of their beds, essentially, all up in their faces 3 times per term to make absolutely sure you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing to get to and through both these places in a reasonable amount of time, because then otherwise you don't save money and you lose time.
Yeah, this is all in the book. These are kind of warnings about the things you might have heard. Okay, honors programs. Is that an attraction that's worth it?
Yes, honors programs and honors colleges can represent a great value at less expensive private universities or larger public ones, but they tend to be 2/3 female, sometimes more. Extremely white. So if you're a person of color, you may want to ask some tough questions about it. And people tend not to persist in many of these programs. So they come thinking they want to do them, and then they don't really see it through. And, at some institutions, as few as 25% of the kids who start in the honors program in the honors college actually finish it, right? And so these are things that the schools don't advertise.
Yeah,
does it matter? Does it matter? I mean,
you got a degree anyway.
You got a degree anyway, but if you were going specifically for the intimacy, the access to mentors, the better internship opportunities, or something else that the honors college was supposed to be offering you, and that's why you made that choice, and then you end up making a different choice, maybe that works out great for you. But if the honors college was the reason you go, and it was the way in which the school convinced you to come, if you're not actually taking advantage of it, then you've made a choice based on the wrong wrong set of variables.
The truth about athletic scholarships. My 11-year-old daughter says someone is a great tennis player. I know she's going to get a college scholarship. Truth?
Yeah, I mean, the odds are just incredibly long, and on a lot of these teams at a lot of these schools, they don't have full rides to give out, or the coaches, only give thousands of dollars at a time to a handful of the athletes and not to everybody. And let's not forget either that you don't get to choose which school offers you money on the basis of your athletic prowess unless you are at the tippy top of the heap, right? And so just because you've got a first choice academically or first choice in terms of fit or first choice geographically doesn't mean that school is going to give you money, and that's Division 1, right? So
okay, college abroad, that's going to be the answer. It'll be cheaper.
It is cheaper, but often, although not always, you don't get what you don't pay for. So, the infrastructure of support, of deans, of mental health counseling, there may not be a dorm at all, right? You may have to find an apartment. There may not be a dining hall. And then you have to ask some tough questions about, okay, what am I going to do during the summer? Where's my internship going to be? Will I be able to get hired back at home? Will I be able to have the work papers to work abroad? And what is this degree going to mean if and when I want to come back to the States? Yeah, so there's an entire chapter about each of these.
Oh, and one more, because I get your daughter, a gap year.
Yes. So I am the father of a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my very first book in 1996 was about gap years. I'm a big believer that you should do them for all sorts of reasons, but the thing that seems to resonate with parents is that people who take gap years get better grades afterwards and better jobs than people who don't. So if you want your kids to get better grades and better jobs, they should take a gap year. And if you don't want them to get better grades and you don't want them to get better jobs, then they shouldn't take a gap year, right? So I don't know how we argue with that, right? But I mean, it's now been proven demonstrably by real people with PhDs that the gap year students do better in school. And, imagine yourself looking at a stack of entry-level resumes. I mean, would you hire the 23-year-old who went and did something different and amazing in the world for a year? Or would you hire one of the, nameless, faceless 22-year-olds who've all kind of done the same thing their whole lives?
I just want to turn it back to Gilda, but before I do, let me say again, all of that stuff, I mean, we just like skimmed the frosting of this fabulous cake. If some of it you didn't understand, it's not because Ron doesn't explain it in the book. It's because we had to go quickly.
Yeah.
You really want to buy this book, The Price You Pay for College. If you have, and I want to stress also that you're so right about starting this conversation freshman year. So there's a reality check. By then, maybe if you have a freshman in 3 years from now, maybe Ron, because of your book, there'll be a lot more price disclosure, but we're, I think, on the cusp of a revolution. Your timing, I know you've been working on this book for years. Your timing is incredible that it comes out now when people are questioning values, questioning where it's worth spending money. I just want to say congratulations again and let you have the last word and then turn it over to Gilda.
Sure. I just want to say thank you again to you, Terry, and to you, Gilda, and to all of you who are out there listening and paying attention. It is a difficult time, given all of the political tumult and all of the public health tumult, to get our heads screwed on straight about this stuff. And yet we have to, and we must. These are our kids. And because they are our kids, and because of what's going on around us, we are ever more likely to make decisions on the basis of emotion rather than reason. And so what is the antidote to that? The antidote to that is more information, better questions, and starting sooner. Not just starting saving sooner, although Terry and I have been beating that drum for decades, each of us. It's starting the planning sooner. It's starting the conversation sooner. And I promise you that if you do that, and if you have, ever more command of the information that is out there and at our disposal, the result will be not so much frustration and anger and fear, but something more like hope, because college is amazing and I cannot wait to send my own daughters, and I'm frankly jealous that they get to go.
Ron and Terry, that was well said. Because we know how our families are hurting so much with the mental health issues, I'm especially grateful to you for sticking around, because I have a few more questions for the lightning round, if you're
Sure.
okay. All right, thank you. 529s, talk about that. One family has said, this is killing my chance for financial aid, and another one, another person asked, should I open a 529? So
yeah, it is not true that your 529 plan is killing your chances for financial aid. Those assets are, taxed by the system at, under 6% annually. You may think that you are being punished for saving, but the way the formulas work is that they want a huge chunk, like up to 43% of your income, not your assets. So you may think it's because of the size of your 529. It's really because of what you earn. That's how these formulas work. And I wish, I wrote a column a couple of years ago trying to put this myth to rest, and it didn't work. So I'm just going to keep repeating it and sending people to it. You can just do a Google for, Ron Lieber will college savings or will 529 plans hurt your chances for financial aid? They just won't. The institutions will want some of that money, but once people understand exactly how the formulas work, they almost never regret having saved, because saving gives you choices. And if you didn't have any savings, you would still be being asked to pay a whole lot of money on the basis of your income, presumably. And then you wouldn't have the savings to draw on.
Okay, a couple of questions on this topic. We got an offer. Can I ask for more?
Yes, you can ask for more, and you should. And just very quickly to break it down, again, 2 systems of financial aid, 2 avenues of appeal. If you have received need-based financial aid, you go to the financial aid office and you try to prove to the financial aid officer that there has been a change of circumstances in your family's situation. Those are the magic words. Change of circumstances. You're asking for professional judgment to be applied to your situation. And then you prove with documents and data what those changes are. Maybe you've taken an income hit because of the pandemic or some other reason. Maybe you've had an outsized expense because of a health issue, or a natural disaster or something else that has befallen you, go prove it, make the ask. The worst that can happen is they'll say no. On the merit aid side, you go to the admissions office because that merit aid offer comes from the admissions office. In fact, it comes from a computer more likely than not. It comes from one of those algorithms, but it's the human beings who take the appeals. And there it's most helpful to have a better offer, not just a raw dollar discount, but like a better net price offer from a competing institution that the school would not want to lose you to. And you go and you present your case and you talk about, what, if anything, your child has done more of and done better at in the months since you applied, and you take your shot. In both instances, approach the financial aid and the admissions offices with humility, not with a head of steam, not with arrogance, not with rudeness. They're dealing with an enormous amount of volume at those times a year. Just say, look, we think there may have been some mistake here and it was probably ours. And we're just wondering if you can take 15 minutes for a reconsideration of our case. And here's where we think things might have gone wrong, or here's the update that we think might be useful to you, right? Yeah. And worst thing that can happen is that they say no. And even if they just shake $1,000 or $2,000 out, well, that's $8,000 over 4 years. That's a quarter of what somebody might borrow as a teenager to go to college. That's real money. You should do it.
Right. This question came from a family, a father. I have 3 sons. I don't have any money saved for college. What kinds of loans are best? Private, school loans? What do you recommend?
Sure. So first of all, no shame, no blame, right? I'm not casting any judgments or aspersions on anyone, on the basis of the choices that they made or didn't make. And the fact that you're investigating this now and trying to do the best that you can means that you're doing right by your kids. So I'm glad you asked. I guess here's the thing that I would ask you, because I don't know enough about your financial situation, would need to ask 15 or 20 pretty personal questions to even begin to have a sense of what kind of loan you might qualify for or what kind of loan might be right. But I guess I would just ask you this, what will it feel like 20 years from now when you're close to what should be retirement age and you possibly have $100 or $150 or $200,000 of debt that you've taken on to send your kids to college? What will that mean for your retirement, if any? Will you be able to continue to work physically? Will people be willing to continue to employ you? And what will it mean for the possibility that your kids might have to take care of you financially in their old age when they're squeezed and they're trying to send their kids to college? So I would just, urge you to kind of paint that picture, because the fact of the matter is that if you've got nothing saved and you can't afford to pay that much out of current income, that's okay. There are tens of millions of Americans who are like that. You can go to community college, your kid can live at home. You go to community college with a full head of steam. You get fantastic grades. You make the connections at the state universities, maybe even in the honors colleges for top students. And, and your lights out student makes the transfer and gets done in 4 years. And it costs $25,000 a year at those state universities. The kid can borrow up to $31,000 or $32,000. They can work during the school year. They can work during the summer. You can help where you can, and it'll get done that way. And that can be a fantastic experience for the student who milks every ounce of value out of the state institutions too.
Yeah. I'm a single parent. Anything is particular that you want to tell me?
I'm going to assume that there is no X in the picture, and you're flying solo completely. And this is not a question about divorce and all of the strangeness around financial aid with divorce. I think the only thing I would suggest, right, is that, because this is such an emotional process, it can be difficult to do it without, without another grown-up in the picture to advise you. So don't just reach out to, friends who are in similar circumstances. Try to find, a trusted sibling or, maybe even a financial advisor or a college counselor who you might pay, even though I know that might be a struggle, to make sure that you're checking in with your instincts, with your emotions, and that you understand all of the options that are available to you. Because trying to do it by yourself is, it's a Herculean task, and every person who does it is a hero, and I admire them. But it's hard to do alone when it's this complicated. And so, you know, I wish you help.
Thank you. I've accepted my child has, and that's another thing. It's not I'm going to college or we're going to college. It's my child is going to college, right?
Mhm.
Except we've accepted and sent in a deposit. Can we change our mind?
Yes, you can. And if this is a question about early decision, I'm just going to make it a question about early decision. Great. You can change your mind about that too. There's this myth out there that early decision is like actually and legally binding or even morally and ethically so. And it just isn't. If the school has not given you the amount of financial aid that you feel you need to make it affordable, then you can change your mind and apply to other schools. And I know that the college counselors may be retching right now, and I apologize
Yes.
for that. But early decision is classist, and until more of us start breaking those commitments on the basis of affordability, right? That's the only way to do it ethically, and the schools allow for that in every instance, right? That's the only way to do it ethically. But until more and more people start walking away, the system isn't going to crumble. And the fact of the matter is that when you are asking people to make a commitment to go without a firm commitment in return ahead of time of exactly what it will cost, the only people who can really afford to roll the dice on that are affluent people or gamblers. And gambling's not smart when we're talking about a six-figure decision. So let me say it again. Early decision is classist. And if you get an offer from an institution that's forced you into a supposedly binding agreement just to get yourself the better admissions odds, that's not a fair deal. And if you don't get a fair deal in return on the affordability, turn and walk.
And Ron, I'm going to say, check with your child's guidance counselor as well, who knows your child best for some of these. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. But look, I have every confidence in the counselors in this community. But there is a fear that I believe is a mistaken one, that the schools, the colleges, will hold it against future students, younger high school students, if somebody turns and walks from an early decision so-called commitment. And that isn't true either. Every place I went, I asked the tippy top admissions official, dozens and dozens of schools, not one of them said that they would hold it against a future student if somebody broke an early decision commitment for financial reasons, for clearly demonstrated financial reasons. So it's if somebody's got proof that that's happened in your community or elsewhere, I want to hear about it. I've been looking to document, vengeful behavior by colleges for years in this regard, because so many counselors and parents are worried that it might happen. I've never been able to find one. And so if it's happened, I want to report on it, because schools shouldn't be doing that. And by the way, when you ask schools this, a lot of them laugh. They, per what Terry said at the very top of her questioning, these schools more often than not are buyers of college students, not sellers of college services. So they can't be in the business of offending a high school like yours with so many amazing students and a lot of, let's face it, affluent families, right? They can't have word getting out that they're like holding something against a bunch of students, because then nobody will apply to their school. It would be a stupid thing for them to do.
Well, I like the way you were very specific about, and if there's a financial consideration, I think that's a really important point. Thank you for that. Last question. What happens for years 2, 3, 4?
I'm glad you asked. So when it comes to need-based financial aid, you have to reapply every year, because the school wants to know if your financial circumstances have changed to the positive or the negative. So that's only fair, but you've got to fill out that godforsaken FAFSA form and the CSS profile again and again and again. So the FAFSA form is actually going to change in the 2022-2023 school year. There was just FAFSA reform passed as a part of the most recent relief bill. So that's great news. Won't change the CSS profile as far as I know, although they may choose to change that. On the merit aid side, generally when you are admitted, the school agrees to keep the merit aid at the same amount for all 4 of your years. And it's generally guaranteed for only 4 years. And often, though not always, you have to maintain a certain grade point average. So you want to be asking about that. Now, again, keep in mind, the price of the school, the list price, will continue to go up in most instances each year, while the merit aid stays the same. So, your net cost is going to go up, but at least you've got this discount over here that the school has said that you will get to keep as long as you meet some basic baseline requirements.
You just mentioned the FAFSA. In Illinois, it is required for all seniors this year they must fill out the FAFSA. If the exception is you fill out a waiver, then you will be exempt, but it's a graduation requirement. So
wow.
In that case, the very last question, do I have to fill it out in terms of the colleges?
Well, you have to fill it out if you want to qualify for any kind of federal financial aid, and that includes student loans. So generally, it's a good idea to do so if you think that you might want that option. And then there are plenty of institutions that will make you fill it out if you want some of their aid as well.
Okay. Well, for the first time, we had no one leaving this call, and there are many hundreds of people on this call. So I can't thank you enough. You know how you both have really made a difference, and I'm so grateful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe.